The Celestial War Academy hung in the void around Kepler Station, like a monument to militaristic optimism, its rotating training modules and weapons ranges gleaming with the sort of technological sophistication that suggested someone had taken the concept of higher education and decided it needed more explosions. 4 to 7 different gravity environments, 33 atmospheric compositions, and enough simulated warfare scenarios to keep a small planet's worth of cadets busy learning how to kill each other with style and proper military protocol. It was, the Academy's promotional materials proudly proclaimed, where the galaxy's future military leaders learned to wage civilized warfare, which was roughly equivalent to teaching someone to politely commit genocide with proper table manners. Cadet Phoenix Reeves stood in the observation deck of Training Module 7, watching her fellow cadets through reinforced transparent steel that could withstand direct hits from most personal weapon systems. The human section of the Academy was positioned strategically near the remedial training facilities and the psychological counseling centers, because apparently the admissions committee had concluded that humans needed both extra help and immediate access to mental health services, which, given the Academy's approach to education through controlled violence, might actually have been the most sensible administrative decision in the institution's history. 18 months she'd been studying tactical theory and combat applications. 18 months of politely explaining that human military doctrine was based on something more sophisticated than charge forward while screaming. The condescension in these halls was so thick you could probably weaponize it and use it to bludgeon enemy forces into submission. Which, knowing human creativity, someone was probably already researching in the Academy's Experimental Weapons Division. Commander Zyx'tar of the Vextran Empire dominated the training floor like a walking demonstration of evolutionary militarism, 9 feet of bio-enhanced muscle and combat modifications that made him look like someone had decided to crossbreed a tank with a particularly aggressive piece of industrial equipment. His species had built their entire military philosophy around the principle that if violence wasn't solving your problems, you simply weren't using enough of it. It was a refreshingly honest approach to warfare, in a deeply terrifying sort of way. The Advanced Combat Evaluation had been proceeding with all the subtlety of a frontal assault. The QEL-NARI cadets kept adjusting their targeting systems in what Phoenix had learned to recognize as their species' equivalent of polite skepticism, while the Thorn representatives maintained their traditional stance of barely controlled bloodlust. Evolution had apparently decided that if you were going to evolve for warfare, why not make your default expression suggest that everything around you was a potential target that just hadn't been properly identified yet? The human tactical assessment remains inadequate, Zyx'tar announced, his voice carrying across the training dome with the authority of someone who'd spent decades turning theoretical military problems into practical body counts. His bio-enhanced vocal cords made even casual observations sound like battlefield orders, which probably saved time during actual combat situations. Your species demonstrates weak strategic thinking, primitive combat instincts, laughable physical capabilities. Phoenix maintained her Academy regulation posture, the one she'd practiced until her spine could hold it for hours without developing the sort of stress fractures that resulted in embarrassing medical reports. With respect, Commander, our simulation scores have improved by 47% over the last. Respect. Zyx'tar's laugh was like artillery fire at close range. You speak of respect while hiding behind protective barriers like civilian refugees. Your entire species approaches warfare from positions of fundamental weakness. The other cadets shifted in their respective training zones, a ripple of anticipation passing through the assembled military students. The Academy's combat protocols were specifically designed to prevent exactly this sort of escalation, which made them about as effective as a diplomatic solution to a planetary invasion. Phoenix could practically see the collective thought forming among her fellow cadets, another tedious human Vextran training dispute that would drag on for hours while they all pretended that military education wasn't essentially a formalized method of teaching people to kill each other more efficiently. Perhaps, Zyx'tar continued, rising to his full intimidating height, a practical demonstration of combat reality is required. Your species claims military competence, yet you cannot even train in standard combat conditions. This was interesting. Phoenix had been waiting 18 months for someone to make exactly this argument, though she'd expected it to come wrapped in more military euphemisms. The Vextran, bless their straightforward warrior hearts, had apparently decided that subtlety was for species with functional peace treaties and adequate defensive budgets. "What sort of demonstration?" she asked, and several cadets actually activated their emergency communication protocols. The QEL-NARI representative began what looked like a prayer to their hunting ancestors, while the Thorn started placing what were obviously wagers on combat duration and casualty estimates. Zyx'tar's bio-enhanced eyes gleamed with predatory military enthusiasm. "Simple. You claim combat readiness? Prove it. Face evaluation without environmental protection. Show this academy that humans deserve the military commissions they seek." The silence that followed was so complete that Phoenix could hear the training dome's atmosphere recyclers operating. Somewhere in the vast academy complex, automated systems were probably running combat simulations, blissfully unaware that they were about to witness either a breakthrough in interspecies military education or a spectacular training accident that would be studied in military psychology classes for the next century. "Very well," Phoenix said, beginning her walk toward the environmental transition chamber. The collective intake of breath from the assembled cadets could have powered a small atmospheric processor. "Shall we say, Combat Arena 3? Standard atmosphere, 1.2 gravity." Zyx'tar's combat modifications actually seemed to hum with excitement. "Acceptable. 15 minutes preparation time." As Phoenix exited the human environmental zone, she caught the Thorn representative frantically updating their species combat assessment databases. The projections, she noted with professional interest, heavily favored Zyx'tar military superiority. Combat Arena 3 embodied everything the Academy represented: efficiently lethal, adequately monitored, and designed by military engineers who'd apparently concluded that if you were going to learn warfare, you might as well do it in an environment that could kill you if you made mistakes. It was, Phoenix reflected, the perfect metaphor for military education, dangerous enough to be educational, controlled enough to minimize paperwork. The cadet observers filed in with the enthusiasm of spectators at a gladiatorial exhibition. The QEL-NARI delegation had brought what appeared to be medical monitoring equipment, while the Thorn had simply brought more sophisticated betting pools. Several other military academies had sent observation teams, because apparently word of the pending combat evaluation had spread through the Academy's communication networks faster than a tactical information leak. Zyx'tar entered like a walking weapons platform, which wasn't entirely metaphorical. His combat modifications gleamed under the arena's tactical lighting, and his bio-enhanced limbs moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime turning training exercises into permanent solutions. The Zyx'tar approach to military education was admirably direct. Identify weakness, apply overwhelming force, file incident reports according to Academy regulations. "You may still withdraw," he announced, his voice echoing across the arena with practiced military authority. "There is no dissonance in acknowledging tactical reality." Phoenix was already removing her academy jacket, folding it with the sort of methodical attention that made several observers reach for their emergency medical kits. Humans, they'd learned, had an uncomfortable tendency toward unpredictable behavior when placed under combat stress. "That's very considerate of you." The formal protocols were mercifully brief. Both participants acknowledged the terms, confirmed their understanding of Academy medical facilities, and agreed that any resulting training incidents would be resolved through proper military channels rather than immediate interspecies warfare. The Academy's legal department had apparently learned from experience that unregulated combat evaluations tended to result in expensive insurance claims and awkward explanations to planetary governments. Zyx'tar flexed his bio-enhanced muscles, all 48 major muscle groups, with sounds like military equipment under stress testing. "Your species has survived galactic warfare through defensive positioning and technological compensation. There is no shame in accepting your tactical limitations." He moved with impressive speed for something the size of a small assault vehicle, closing the distance between them in 3 strides. His primary combat limbs swept toward Phoenix's face in what was clearly calculated as a controlled strike, enough to break her nose and establish military dominance without actually killing her and triggering extensive Academy investigations. The Zyx'tar were nothing if not practical about their educational violence. The impact was everything he'd anticipated. the satisfying sound of cartilage yielding, the spray of blood that would demonstrate proper combat hierarchy, the immediate backward stumble that would confirm established military theory. What he hadn't anticipated was for Phoenix to use that backward momentum to grab a training weapon rack, pivot with the grace of a zero-gravity combat specialist, and drive the improvised weapon into his left knee joint with enough force to compromise both the equipment and his confidence in the evaluation. The sound Zyx'tar made transcended normal Vextran military vocabulary, conveying approximately 21 different concepts related to surprise, pain, and immediate tactical re-evaluation. His secondary limbs reached for the damaged joint, while his primary arms attempted to maintain combat balance, which proved to be a strategic error of impressive magnitude. Phoenix was already in motion, blood streaming from her broken nose, but her eyes focused with a sort of calm intensity that made several observers reach for their emergency evacuation protocols. She stepped inside his guard, drove her elbow into what passed for his center of mass, and when he doubled over, brought her knee up to meet his descending face with a sound like military equipment experiencing catastrophic failure. The QEL Nari combat analyst later described the next 53 seconds as educational in ways that violate several academy training protocols. Zyx'tar, enhanced warrior of the Vextran military hierarchy, found himself receiving practical instruction in several concepts that weren't covered in standard military academy curricula. Human adaptability. For instance, the way their joints functioned in directions that seemed to violate basic biomechanical principles. Human resourcefulness, as demonstrated by the 27 different ways a determined individual could weaponize standard training equipment. And human persistence, which apparently included the willingness to continue combat operations while bleeding from facial injuries. The commander's bio-enhanced combat modifications, designed to deflect energy weapons and projectile attacks, proved remarkably inadequate against someone who fought like a combat engineer with a technical manual and a personal grudge. Phoenix used his enhanced mass against him, redirecting his charges into training equipment, structural supports, and on one particularly memorable occasion, the arena's tactical display system that was supposed to monitor safe training parameters. By the time Zyx'tar realized that he'd made a fundamental miscalculation about human military capabilities, Phoenix had already demonstrated several advanced techniques that would have impressed an academy combat instructor. His left secondary arm made a sound like structural failure as she applied what appeared to be some form of mechanical leverage principle, and his confident military proclamations became something considerably less articulate. The assembled cadets watched in fascination as 18 months of academic frustration transformed into a masterclass in applied tactical thinking. The Thorn delegation was frantically updating their combat assessment algorithms, while the QEL Nari representatives had moved beyond documentation into what appeared to be philosophical contemplation of military chaos theory. When the Academy security team finally responded to the disturbance, they discovered Commander Zyx'tar on the arena floor, missing one bio-enhanced arm and most of his military dignity, while Phoenix sat calmly on the only remaining intact equipment rack, using the arena's emergency medical supplies to address her nasal injury. The blood had already stopped flowing, but the stains on her Academy uniform would probably require professional cleaning. Medical assistance requested, she announced politely to the security coordinator, gesturing toward the groaning Vextran. Commander Zyx'tar appears to have experienced a training accident. The security coordinator, a veteran academy administrator who'd witnessed every form of military education disaster the galaxy could produce, surveyed the destroyed arena and began completing his incident report. Training accident, he repeated carefully. Equipment malfunction, Phoenix explained helpfully. These training racks can be unstable when not properly maintained. The Academy Medical Facility's atmosphere was thick with regenerative compounds and bewilderment. Zyx'tar occupied a treatment pod designed for Vextran physiology, his missing limb being reconstructed through the marvels of advanced military medicine. The process would require 12 hours and leave him with a replacement that functioned perfectly but would never quite integrate with his enhanced nervous system, a permanent reminder of the day he'd learned that military assumptions could be literally disarming. The cadet representatives filed through like military observers examining a failed operation, each attempting to reconcile what they'd witnessed with their existing models of human combat behavior. The Thorn tactical analyst approached Phoenix with something approaching professional respect. Your species, he calculated carefully, has been Conservative in your military presentations. Phoenix looked up from the medical scanner she was using to assess her nasal damage. We believe in tactical surprise and operational security. The QEL-NARI combat attaché produced a sound that might have been appreciation if filtered through several layers of predatory instinct. Conservative. Yes, that's one interpretation of your warfare doctrine. News of the combat evaluation propagated through the Academy's information networks with the efficiency of a well-designed intelligence operation. Within hours, every military academy had updated their files on human psychology, human capabilities, and human approaches to combat training. The medical insurance underwriters were already recalculating risk premiums, while the Academy's maintenance crews were developing new protocols for reinforcing training equipment. Military Attaché Colvan of the Hegemony Defense Force approached Phoenix during the next training cycle, his usual expression of tactical skepticism replaced by something considerably more respectful. Perhaps, he suggested diplomatically, we should revisit the parameters of human cadet evaluations. That would be very productive, Phoenix replied, accepting a fresh ice pack from an automated medical drone. Though I should mention, this was quite restrained by human military standards. The pause that followed was heavy with strategic implications. 5 days later, the combat evaluations reconvened in the Academy's primary training complex. The environmental barriers had been quietly reconfigured, replaced by what the Academy described as enhanced atmospheric integration for improved military communication. Which was military terminology, for nobody wants to explain why humans suddenly don't need protective isolation anymore. Zyx'tar participated via holographic projection from his medical pod, his new limbs still integrating and his military philosophy considerably revised. The Vextran Empire's official position on human combat capabilities had undergone what the military reports described as strategic reassessment based on empirical battlefield data. The combat evaluations that had been militarily inadequate for 18 months were suddenly finding enthusiastic support. The QEL-NARI wanted to discuss human tactical techniques, particularly those related to adaptive combat management under adverse conditions. The Thorn were interested in human approaches to creative problem resolution in hostile military environments. Several other military academies had submitted requests for training exchange programs, though they were notably vague about what specific human qualities they hoped to study. The human tactical evaluations demonstrate significant military merit, announced the Defense Force representative, his voice carrying across the complex with newfound respect. Perhaps we have been hasty in our previous assessment protocols. Phoenix nodded graciously from her new position in the Advanced Cadet section, no longer relegated to her species' remedial training area. The small medical patch across her nose was the only visible reminder of recent events, though several cadets seemed to find it profoundly significant. We appreciate the Defense Force's tactical reassessment. Humans have always believed that effective military training requires direct engagement. The Thorn combat analyst processes clicked in what had definitely shifted from skepticism to approval. Indeed, direct engagement can be illuminating from a strategic perspective. As the evaluations proceeded with unprecedented efficiency, Phoenix contemplated the curious mathematics of military education. 18 months of detailed tactical presentations, comprehensive combat theory, and respectful military dialogue had achieved precisely nothing. 53 seconds of direct demonstration had accomplished what a decade of traditional military academics might never have managed. The universe, it appeared, still operated according to some fundamental principles about the relationship between actions and military outcomes. Though she suspected this particular case study would never appear in standard academy training materials. In the medical facility, Zyx'tar calibrated his replacement limb and reflected on the peculiar nature of military assumptions. The Vextran Empire's war colleges would soon be incorporating new modules into their combat curricula, focusing on species that presented deceptively vulnerable tactical profiles. The term deceptive would feature prominently in their revised military assessments. The Celestial War Academy's Maintenance Division, meanwhile, had gained valuable experience in structural reinforcement and the importance of selecting training equipment based on its potential applications as improvised weapon systems. Combat Arena 3 had been completely renovated, though the tactical display system had been permanently relocated for what the administration described as improved operational safety protocols. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of galactic military education, tactical analysts were updating humanity's classification from auxiliary support personnel to approach with comprehensive strategic preparation, though they were struggling to find appropriate terminology for a species that conducted warfare like engineers with anger management issues and unlimited access to improvised weapons. The combat evaluations concluded with assessments that exceeded humanity's most optimistic projections. Military commissions were awarded, advanced training programs negotiated, and tactical cooperation protocols implemented. The galaxy had suddenly discovered that humans had been significantly undervalued in their military assessments, and everyone was eager to correct that particular strategic oversight before any more educational demonstrations became necessary. As the cadets departed from the training complex, Phoenix remained behind, reviewing her final commission paperwork. The irony wasn't lost on her that the most successful military breakthrough in human academy history had been achieved through what was essentially a training room brawl with better documentation. The universe, she reflected, had a peculiar sense of military humor. 18 months of explaining human capabilities had accomplished nothing. 53 seconds of demonstrating them had revolutionized everything. Zyx'tar would carry that lesson in his replacement limb for the remainder of his military career, a permanent reminder that assumptions about combat weakness could be literally painful to maintain. The galaxy had learned that humans were not, in fact, the defensive specialists they'd appeared to be, but rather a species that preferred peaceful military cooperation not from inability, but from strategic choice. And sometimes, just sometimes, tactical conditions changed. The Celestial War Academy continued its stately orbit, training countless military officers and conducting interspecies combat education with the same technological magnificence it had always possessed. But somewhere in its vast databases, new protocols were being written, new tactical assessments filed, and new warnings issued about the curious nature of human military accommodation. After all, as any competent military strategist could tell you, it's not the species that make the loudest combat threats you need to worry about. It's the ones that smile politely while calculating exactly how to dismantle your entire tactical doctrine with training equipment. The galaxy had learned this lesson the hard way, one broken nose and severed limb at a time.